send out that report to everybody afterwards. Oh, and I see Nat's here.
Yay!
Yay!
Barely.
You made it. That's so frustrating.
But now I think I'm here twice and I can't make myself go away.
Oh, I only see you once.
Oh, yeah. I only see you once. I see PBIS apps training team twice, but you are just once.
Yeah, that's me twice. So that's okay. I'm echoing on my end. I can hear myself twice.
That's so annoying.
Super annoying, but I'm just doing the first part. So
yeah,
we'll just go from there. Welcome everybody. I'm Nadia Sampson. Who am I? I am on the PBIS apps training team. I've worked here for a really long time. I am now the longest term employee, but I'm not. Oh, I'm close to being the oldest employee too, but that's okay. That's all right. Okay. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how annoying this is to hear yourself twice, but that's all right.
If we boot out, can we, for the other PBIS apps one, can we remove that?
I've tried. Okay. Maybe you guys can go to host tools.
Yeah.
But it's not showing up on my list.
It's not for me either.
And I've done all I can. Okay.
We'll just move forward. Do you want me to take these slides or you want to go for it?
I'll go for it. Why don't you just share? Oh yeah, I'll share mine.
Stop then. Great. Yeah. Okay. Thanks everyone for your patience.
Yes, much appreciated. 1 second. Of course, now my PowerPoint's missing. This is what happens when you are all ready. You get here 15 minutes early.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. Come on.
I'm going to unmute is what I'm going to do. Maybe also while Nad is finding that in the chat, your next question, which could also help us today, is where are you in the process of tier 2? So are you guys just starting, trying to get better, never even heard of tier 2? Just that'll help us organize our thoughts for you all.
Okay, can you all see my screen? Great. All right, so I'll just quickly, I've introduced myself. I'm Nadia Sampson. Most people call me Nad. Let's just go ahead and get started. Oh, I love people are putting stuff in the chat. 6 sites are, oh, cool. So typically we, at ECS, PBIS apps, we talk mostly about our applications and less about like the whole PBIS framework. But what we're realizing is that lots of folks don't have coaches anymore. And so we are working to do more webinars around the PBIS framework. So that's what we're doing today. Yeah. Okay. If you know us, Educational Community Supports is a research unit at the University of Oregon, and it's run by Kent McIntosh. And PBIS Apps lives in Educational and Community Supports in the College of Education at the University of Oregon. We are an onion. Yes. Layers and layers. I found this the other day and I thought it was kind of funny because I bet some of you can look at this and go, oh, I just thought of one to 3 students that this resembles a little bit, that you start feeling that way about your kiddos, right? About some of your kiddos, like they're out to get me. So I just thought this was a nice reminder in a sense of those students are often the students that would most benefit from tier 2. for tier 2 or targeted interventions. Those kiddos that are kind of have that maybe annoying, low level kind of behavior that gets under our skin are sometimes the kiddos that would benefit from some kind of intervention. They're not quite having the success we had hoped just with tier 1. So I thought that was a funny one. So agenda today. What is tier 2? Why are we investing in, why is it important to invest in tier 2? And then Mara's going to walk us through the TFI 3.0 for planning. And Danielle will take us through why investing in tier 2 is so important. If you are using the TFI 2.1, no worries. There's enough overlap. It will be just fine. We know a lot of folks are not choosing to use the TFI 3.0 yet. We have both on PBIS assessment, so no worries. We would probably consider the TFI 3.0 a little bit of a work in progress. We are still getting clarification from the authors on some of the items. But we did want to use it for our webinars just to familiarize ourselves and you all with the new version. All right, so what is tier 2? It's cake. Tier 2 is cake. I chose this particular graphic because tier 2 is about layering, okay? And this, I thought it looked delicious. So you'll see this theme a little bit throughout because Mara and Danielle also took it even further. So, okay. So tier 2, what is it? Tier 2 really is about practices and systems that provide targeted interventions for students that maybe aren't quite having the success we would hope for at tier 1, just with tier 1. Okay, so it really focuses on students. It's almost like an early intervention. We're trying to catch these students before their needs become even greater and they need more intensive supports. So it really focuses on early signs of potentially serious behavioral issues. And it's not as intense as tier 3, but it's a little bit more than tier 1. And we'll talk about what that layering looks like in just a minute. So in tier 2, that's where targeted interventions frequently live. So those targeted interventions are standardized. So when we talk about tier 2, we're talking about interventions that can be used for multiple students. They're standardized, they're not individualized. Sometimes you'll hear people say they're group-based interventions, and that can be a little bit confusing because you're like, oh, so is everybody sitting in a room together? It's group. That's not quite what we mean. We mean that there's groups of students that might benefit from tier 2 interventions, such as check in, check out, social skills. Maybe there's academic support groups. And what we know is that targeted interventions, especially check in, check out, are once students are referred, about 67% of those students that are referred for tier 2 benefit from those targeted interventions. They have some success. That is really important about that we choose students that would actually benefit. So I look at this and say, hey, we're doing a pretty good job that the students that are being referred for tier 2 supports are having success. And that's a credit to the educators that are leading that effort. So, all right, the core principles of tier 2. So it's layered. It's built on a foundation of tier 1. It's based on your tier 1 or school-wide expectations, your universal, right? It layers right on top of that. Okay, so students that are receiving tier 2 support are still receiving tier 1. Okay, it's just they're getting a little bit more. It's layered on top of, they're being monitored more frequently, they're being given feedback more frequently. Okay, but it's based on those school-wide or your universal or foundation intervention. It's targeted, so it provides frequently explicit small group interventions, right? So we're giving focused attention on students who need it and who need a little bit extra to understand, for example, what safe, respectful, responsible looks like. And we're also giving them more feedback more frequently to let them know when they're doing it well and when they need some feedback about correcting some of their behavior. Okay. It's also data driven. If you have a targeted intervention in your school that is not collecting data, you're not quite meeting that expectation of what a targeted intervention looks like. The reason being is that if we can't look at how a student started in an intervention and how they're doing once that intervention is implemented or they're finished with that intervention, we don't really know how effective it's been. We actually need to know, where did we start and where are we now? And we want to be able to look at data that lets us know that we are that our students are getting those better outcomes and that what we're doing is making a difference. It's also very collaborative. So there's usually a team. Sometimes it's called a tier 2 team. Sometimes it's a tier 2, tier 3 team. But it includes teachers, oftentimes specialists, maybe your school psych, your school's counselor, your behavior specialists. And oftentimes you're including families a bit more in targeted interventions or tier 2, because you want them to be a part of that process. So for example, if you have a student that is on check-in, check-out, there's often a family school linkage that is built into that intervention. Okay, so parents or families or guardians can be a part of that. It's also tier 2 interventions are evidence-based. If we're going to use an intervention, if we're going to put time, effort, money behind an intervention, we want to be sure that there's some evidence behind it. There's research behind it that says, yes, this is effective, right? We are using our resources wisely, and we're giving our students something that we know generally works. Okay. All right. So tier 1 is our foundation. That's where that fits. Tier 2 fits. Tier 1 is here. And then if we don't have that strong tier 1 in place, what happens sometimes is that we're overrun with students being referred for tier 2 or targeted interventions or even individualized interventions. So it's really, really important that that foundation, our universal system, is in place, or we can just be overloaded. Tier 2 is supposed to be efficient and effective, and it can't be if we have too many students being referred. That some of those students probably would have done really well if we had our strong universal system in place and may not have needed tier 2 or targeted interventions. Okay. Okay, so levels of support. Notice how this triangle kind of blends. There's no just hard line. And we know that. We know that students don't necessarily fit in the boxes. And I'll talk about that, or the triangle, right? So what we're talking about today are the targeted supplemental interventions and supports that are provided to some students. Tier 1, the core universal instruction and supports, are for all students. And as we go up the triangle, the tier 3 supports, the most individualized, are for a smaller group of students. So we hope to catch 80% of our students with our universal or our core instructional and supports. Typically, there's maybe 10 to 15% of our students that are going to need a little bit more support, and then another 5% that might need more individualized attention and support, which is definitely more intensive. Okay. So if you think about the layering of those tiers, we talk about, or we can think about it in terms of ice cream. Tier 1 is kind of vanilla. Everybody's getting that, right? Everyone's getting our tier 1 universal. Tier 2 has some sprinkles on the top. So it still includes the tier 1 foundational pieces, but we're just adding supports and feedback to students who need those more targeted interventions. And eventually those students hopefully will graduate or fade from those tier 2 interventions, and the tier 1 supports will be enough, right? But for now, we know that some of our students need the sprinkles. They need a little bit more. And we also know that some of our students need the full meal deal in terms of a hot fudge sundae, right? They need the cherry on top, they need the fudge, they need the sprinkles, they need all of it. Again, they are still receiving all those tier 1 supports. It's being layered on top of these different ones, and you're still basing those tier 3 and tier 2 interventions on the tier 1 universal core foundational curriculum program. Okay.
That was great, Nad. Can I just add something that I like about this?
Yes.
I love ice cream and the sundaes, and it's just a beautiful thing. But I think it also is a good metaphor because it's positive, right? We aren't punishing kids at tier 2 and 3. I mean, we're not actually giving them like candy, and that's not the idea, but it's to give them, something that increases the likelihood that their behavior will improve, that they will be meeting our expectations and be, successful at school. And so sometimes we think of it as like, oh, we need to, do something. There's a consequence for their behavior, but the consequence doesn't have to be negative or punitive, right? Like we're looking for things that really uplift them and build skills and those kinds of things. So yeah.
Thanks, Danielle.
You're welcome.
Really important.
Yeah.
Really important. Especially when you think of that little fish that, Dory that we showed at the beginning. It's like, these might be the kids that it feels like, oh, look, the teacher's last nerve. I'm going to poke it. I want to touch it.
Yeah.
So those sometimes are the kiddos that will need the sprinkles or even more. So, but it's all based on positive. I remember working in a school years ago when I suggested, I said, I'm wondering if this student might benefit from check and check out. And the teacher, her homeroom teacher is like, well, we don't want to punish her. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's not what I was talking about. So there's a lot of misinformation out there that that's what this is about, that tier 2 or tier 3 is about. And it's not, it's about providing supports.
100%. Nad, we can't see your slideshow anymore, but I think still,
I wonder why.
I don't know. I don't think you're sharing your screen at all because we're just seeing all our faces.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. There we go.
There we go.
You got it.
All right. So I feel like I've kind of belabored this a little bit, so I won't talk a lot. But there's supplemental small group supports. About 10 to 15% of our students might benefit from tier 2 support. They're very targeted for academic, behavioral, social, emotional needs of our students. Okay. We don't want them to continue to fall behind in different academic, socially, any of those things. So we're going to boost them up as quickly as we can once we notice some of those behaviors that would lead us to believe that they're on a trend that they might need more intensive supports. All right. Okay. One thing I just wanted to clarify. We don't talk about our students as that's a green level, that's a red student, and that's a yellow student, right? It's not about putting kids in categories. It's about what level of support do those students need to be successful. So for my daughter, it's almost the opposite of this triangle, but she really struggled in math. She needed tier 3 supports in math. We really needed to supplement her the universal curriculum for her. Writing, she did really well with the universal curriculum. For this student, if we said this was a different student, it's just the opposite. They did really well with the universal curriculum, but as reading, social emotional, writing, they needed a little bit more support. So it's about the level of support that student needs. It's not about they're a red student or a yellow student, okay? So as the support levels increase, so does our intensity and frequency of monitoring, and there are more resources involved. So we do a lot to make sure our foundation or our universal or green zone is really strong. So we're catching 80% of our students before they need tier 2 or tier 3 supports. All right, I've shown you the obligatory triangles, got to show you some circles. I think these come up a little bit later in the presentation too, but PBIS or an MTSS framework, how many S's did I say? That's all right. MTSS framework is really based on data, systems, and practices that lend themselves to us getting more equity in our schools, more equitable outcomes. If we're doing it right, we should be seeing that students are succeeding more equitably, that we're doing things that support our staff behavior, so that they can sustain implementation overall. So we've got systems in place that do that. We also want to be sure that have practices in place, so interventions, for example, that will support our students' behavioral, social, academic growth. Okay, so those are those practices. What are we doing on the ground to support our students? And then data is really critical. And sometimes we lose sight of that. But if we can't monitor what's happening for our students, if we don't know if what we're doing is making a difference, students stay on interventions for a really long time. And sometimes they stay on interventions that don't work for them at all. And it becomes punishing, right? I've been on check in, check out for 5 years. I'm kind of over it at this point. That means maybe this intervention wasn't the right one for me, or we just haven't been looking at data to see like, wait, we can start fading those supports, okay? We're looking at getting to better outcomes, social competence, academic achievement. We want data that supports our decision-making. We want practices that support student behavior, and we want systems that allow our staff to efficiently and effectively implement interventions, a curriculum, efficiently and effectively. I think I already said that, but just really important that we have all of these in place, okay? Or working towards getting all of them in place. Okay, I'm going to stop talking, thank goodness, because I've heard myself many times now.
Oh, that's got to be so annoying.
I can't even tell you.
Yeah.
So if I disappear, don't worry. I'll be back. But I at least have to get that voice out of my head.
I'm going to take this next section.
Great. Thanks, Danielle.
Sec. You bet. Great job. Okay. Presenter view. Give me a thumbs up. Are you seeing the right thing? Yay. I love when it works on the first try. Okay. Oh, poor Nad, you're frozen. She looks like, wait, what? Oh, no, there you go. Okay, so let's talk about why we do this work, why we invest in standardized tier 2 practices and systems. And we're really emphasizing that word standardized because the idea is that, I'll use my daughter, her name's Savannah, if she were struggling with her behavior and the tier 1 team, let's say, was looking at it and noticing, gosh, she's got an increase in some discipline referrals, teachers are requesting some support, we want to get Savannah or any kiddo that support and those skills as soon as possible. So if the intervention like check in, check out is standardized, it's the same for everybody. So Savannah could start as soon as tomorrow, or maybe, it's by Monday, let's get things rolling. So we can plug her right in, and we start with everybody. It's standard for all the kids. So whether it's Savannah, my 7th grader, a 6th grader, 8th grader at her school, they would all experience the same thing. All right, so why do we invest in these? Well, the core idea is to really bridge that gap, right? We talk a lot about the achievement gap, but that's also important when it comes to students' behavior and social emotional skills. And so we know that if we do tier 1 with fidelity, it's usually really effective for about 85% of our kiddos. And the idea is there we keep doing that. And like Dad said, that's the vanilla. They're still getting that layer, and we're going to add more to that to give them more of what they need. The same way we do with academic content, right? If Savannah needed additional math help, she's still learning the same things as her peers and getting more support on top of that. So it's bridging that gap, right? Also, the big part of PBIS, and that I've always found very, I just think brilliant, and why it really resonated with me when I was a classroom teacher, was that it's really focused on prevention, like doing things early. And you know, we can predict, we have data to show, like if you know the trajectory of behaviors if we don't intervene. And so the more we do early, the more likely it is that we can give those kids support before it gets to something where they really need that more intensive support, which kids are still going to do, but that's the logic here and what the research supports. And then finally, why we invest in tier 2 interventions is for the outcomes, right? I always think of this when I think of our, you know, you see these memes where it's like, teachers, we don't do it for the income, we do it for the outcome. I'm like, well, I also do it to get a paycheck. I do have you know, some, you know, I need to be paid, but we are doing this to ultimately create more positive and inclusive learning environments for everybody, our kiddos, our staff, our families. Like, that's what this work is all about. And hopefully that's why you're here, you know, in education and interested in supporting kiddos at tier 2. All right, so here is a list of some of the key benefits of tier 2 standardized interventions. So first off, like anything in the PBIS framework or triangle, we're all about being as proactive and preventative as possible. So I think even teachers newer to the field would be able to prevent or predict that, you know, the school year, you start off great, that first week or two of school, things are going swimmingly, but 3-4 weeks in, now that, you know, we start seeing some behaviors escalate. And so we really focus on that with tier 2 as well, to address these challenges as early as possible, to save our resources at tier 3 for the kiddos who really truly need that the most. And then targeted skill building. So this is where a big part, like check in, check out's one of the most evidence-based tier 2 interventions. And that's what it really is. It's teaching kids those skills so that they can be able to regulate their own behavior, check in and monitor that. And it always focuses on the school-wide expectations, and we build on that. We say these kids, they got you know, they did the tour of the building and saw what the expectations were on the playground and in the library and those kinds of settings. That's not working for them. So we need something a little more to help continue to teach, to reinforce those. And a lot of times that is involved with, or that involves additional education as well as additional positive feedback. So really still focus, like we said, rather than being punitive, on building those kids up and giving them more feedback, more recognition when they are meeting the expectations and making progress. Maybe it's not, we're expect progress, not perfection, right? We want to see them moving towards that and understand these are kids, they're learning, and it's going to be baby steps. Ultimately, a big benefit of this or goal is to have an overall improved school climate, right? We want to work and send our kiddos to schools in places that are positive, right? That feel like they're welcoming, that the school climate is conducive to a place that kids and adults want to show up. And that includes reducing things like disruptions, right? Having classrooms and learning environments where kids can really focus on what they need to without distractions from kids that are off task. And then finally, a key benefit of a tier 2 system is really we are all about using data for decision making, right? And so collecting data at tier 2. A big part of that is progress monitoring. So if my daughter Savannah was on an intervention like check in, check out, that's something that is looked at regularly by a team to say maybe every week or every 2 weeks, how is Savannah doing? How are all our kids doing on this intervention? And then we can make adjustments, right? So again, we start with that same standardized version of check in, check out. But if 2 weeks in, we realize there's a change that needs to be made. Maybe the mentor that Savannah is meeting with every morning is just not a good match. Or that person, like I'll just use Miss Inman, the school counselor at her school, is like, I can't meet with her. I'm trying to, but I keep getting called on the walkie-talkie. So we're going to have Mr. Hanna, the security person that my daughter does really connect with. That would be a better match for her. Maybe you make a change like that and see how that goes. So monitoring the progress and making adjustments as we need. So what does this look like in practice? Well, really the focus here is on having things that are standardized and targeted support for groups of students. So if it was Savannah, ultimately at a middle school of a 6th, 7th, 8th grade, there may be, 10 or 20 kids at one time on that same intervention. And so it's standardized. It's for a group of students who all need it. They're not experiencing it together necessarily, like a small group instruction that maybe a counselor delivers on friendship groups or something like that. They're doing it individually on their own, in their own learning and classrooms, but it's the same basically for everybody. So some examples of that are small group reading instruction to close academic gaps, right? I'm sure you've got lots of those going on across our buildings, especially with literacy. Check in, check out we've mentioned this many times, and I know we've got some webinars coming up where we'll focus more specifically on that intervention. So we'd invite you to join those. But that's kind of the gold standard of examples of a tier 2 intervention. That's the most evidence-based. Others are social skills groups to build those positive interactions. And then sometimes schools do things like structured breaks to teach self-management. All right, so that's really the focus. And then how we implement that looks different based on those interventions, but we want to make sure that that it's something that's known by everyone in the building, that it really works with those classroom teachers. All right, so the goals of tier 2 interventions, here are some of those, right? We're really, like we said, building up a dose of more positivity, a dose of, skill building. These kiddos, through their behavior, is communicating that they're not getting it, right? The same way that if they were not meeting their benchmarks for academic content, we'd be like, all right, we need more instruction for them. So that's what the goal of tier 2 really is, to provide skill development and more time for these kiddos to work with that. It also provides more structure and predictability, right? For some kiddos, having something like check in, check out gives them a checklist for what they're looking for, and they're knowing that now they're meeting with an adult in the morning. That can really be I like to say it bookends the day with positive interaction, right? They're meeting with an adult who's just there to be like, hey Savannah, glad to see you. How was the movie you watched with your mom last night? Oh my gosh, I love Mean Girls. Whatever, they're going to talk about it. We just watched Mean Girls, by the way, so it's familiar. But they're building those relationships, and at the end of the day, they're bookending it with let's focus on what you did well today, Savannah, and then make some goals maybe for tomorrow too. So for some kiddos, that additional structure and that additional adult contact can be really reinforcing and helpful, right? Again, giving them more feedback, right? And again, focusing on the 5-to-1 ratio, even in tier 2, I think is even more important. These kids are already hearing that they're struggling and maybe school doesn't work for them. And so we want to counter that with really intentionally positive messages, and then building up those skills. So some of the key features of tier 2 interventions, we really like to think of these within those circles. So with data, right, we are collecting data on how kids are doing in these interventions. Ideally, that's happening daily, or even in check in, check out, for example, by period, or in time slots. If it's an elementary school, it's like morning reading block, maybe it's recess, those kinds of things. And then the data is also flexible and based on some assessments. We've got some systems here as well under those key features, so I'll let you kind of look those over, but really this is something that is systematic, right? This is done the same way across the building for all the kiddos. And then we've got some practices. Those are the interventions. That's kind of what we're actually doing with the kids, right? So things like more adult supervision, providing increased instruction, more opportunities for positive feedback and reinforcement, giving kiddos some choice in how they participate. It might not be, do you want to do this or not? That's not maybe the question, but it's how might this look? What color paper do we print the check and checkout sheet on? Which here's a few mentors you could. Do you want to work with Ms. Inman or Dr. or Mr. Hannah? Who's your check-in person? Giving them some options and some of that choice really helps with the buy-in for them and feeling like they have that sense of autonomy. Yeah, and really a lot of the interventions are really focused on the function of behavior. So if we know for that kiddo like Savannah, and it is true, she's an only child and she loves adult attention. She loves hanging out with grown-ups, including Auntie Nad here, one of her favorite grown-ups. But for her, check and check out would be a great intervention because she would get more time with adults and more feedback from them. Like she'd love it. For other kiddos, they'd be like, heck no, that sounds terrible. That's not for me. All right, so those interventions are really just the beginning. And one thing, kind of final note on this section that I'll end with is that we're really looking for this to be something that is still considered a school-wide effort, and it ties into what's going on across the building. So something like check in, check out, even if only, a small percentage of your population is going to be part of that, everybody in the building should know what it is, should know how it works. So that if Savannah was like in your class on Monday, you could support her right away and know what to do and how to build up the positivity there. So I will end there and I'm going to switch it over to Mara. Mara, do you want to share your slides or do you want me to just click through?
I think you can just click for me.
Sounds good.
I'll just give you the click now. Okay, so excuse me. Kind of wrapping us up. We have 15 minutes left. I'm going to try to not go too fast through this. But we're just saying kind of, it's the first time we've done this. So our timing and that type of stuff, we may go a little over 11 because I'd rather say all the things and you guys be able to come back and see it in the recording than super rush. But definitely know if you need to really go at 11 o'clock, we totally understand and we'll make sure you all have the recording. So the last section is really talking about, Danielle was really stressing that the systems and doing this systematically in your buildings. And so this section is really talking about how to do that. And right, because that sounds so easy, but it's not. So can you go back to my recipe, Len? Because, we want to keep the baking analogy going as long as possible. Thanks, Danielle. So, thinking about if I'm going to go bake a cake, right? I'm going to build tier 2. I'm going to go bake a cake. I don't just start dumping stuff into a bowl and hoping that this amazing cake comes out, right? Like I'm going to do some work first, and I'm going to probably start by looking at a recipe. And I'm going to use that recipe to make sure I have all the things I need, right? I can't bake a cake without flour. So if I don't have the ingredients, I have to make sure I have a plan for getting them. Also, when I'm looking at that recipe, because I'm not an amazing baker, I'm asking myself, am I ready to do this? Do I have the skills? Do I know how to do the things that this recipe is asking me to do? And if I don't, I have two choices. I can try to find a different recipe, right? I can be like, okay, I'm going to go do something different. I'm not ready to do this one yet. Or I'm going to have to go do some additional learning and find out how to do those things, right? So we're really talking about kind of your recipe for building tier 2. And as it looked like most of you are kind of supporting schools, you're not directly in school. So thinking about how to do that. And so really quickly in the chat, as I'm talking, if you maybe scale 0, 1, 2, I've never heard of the TFI. I kind of know about the TFI is a 1, and a 2 is, yes, we use the TFI a lot and I'm familiar with it. And that'll just, again, help me know how much to talk about certain things in the next couple slides. Okay, awesome. So with that, Danielle, if you want to go to the next slide. Yay, 2s. Okay. And if you're not at a 2, don't worry. That's okay. But I will definitely work on the assumption that people are familiar with the TFI. So again, the TFI is really helping us look at the systems and that we have in place to support our practices, and how are we supporting our staff to implement tier 2. And I think somebody said, maybe I missed this, but anyway, like in my district, I will be honest, we were using the TFI religiously for tier 1, but we never really got to using it well for tier 2 or tier 3. And so again, you can kind of be in different places because it covers the different tiers. But the idea being, it's really helping us think about our systems. And in education, a lot of times, maybe you guys are seeing this in the buildings, they're like, yes, we want check-in, check-out, please, 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 right? And they don't want to take the time to think about how to do that intervention well. And when we were starting check-in, check-out in the district that I'm in, it was grant funded. And so you got some IA time, some instructional assistant time, right? So I had a principal that was like, yes, please. I want to do check-in, check-out. And he was super excited to do it. And then the minute we started talking about it, and I was like, whoa, dude, you got to slow down. You got to do some things first. He didn't want to hear that, right? He wanted to get it going. And he was like, Mara, when I taught my son to ride a bike, I just put him on the bike and I just sent him and he learned to ride a bike, right? And I was like, well, that's great for your kid, right? But if you had known that your kid was going to fall off his bike and maybe get hurt and then maybe not want to get on his bike again, would you have done things differently, right? And so when we're starting something with our staff and we're asking our staff to do something new, we really need to invest up front to make sure that we're setting them up for success, because it's hard enough to get a staff to all be on the page and excited about a new thing, right? In the best case scenario, it's really, really hard to get them to get on board if they've already tried it and it hasn't worked, right? So definitely pays to invest in those systems up front. Okay, next slide. I feel like I like my own little Vanna. Thanks, Danielle. And so really thinking about the tiered fidelity inventory, the new 3.0 or the 2.1 as your recipe. When you're working with those teams, when you're coaching them, it can really be a nice way for them to go through and be like, do we have these things in place? And if not, how are we going to get there? And so again, resources here for you all for the manual on the tiered fidelity inventory, as well as resources specifically from our PBIS apps team. And we haven't gotten to the tier 2 one yet, but we are offering some webinars on the tier 1 to get familiar with the 3.0. So just wanted you all to know those were out there. Next slide. How'd that get there? There we go. Okay.
Sorry,
so again, you guys all
something wrong.
I was like, no, don't mess with me. You guys all feel like you're pretty familiar with the TFI. So again, just reminding us, it can be lots of different things. In this purpose, we're using it as a guide for planning our implementation. Next slide. While she's going there. So the new TFI, the 3.0, has 4 subscales of items. So there's 15 items for tier 2. There's one on teams. There's one on the practices of that team. What does the team do when they're together? There's one on systems, and there's one on data. And we all talked about this beforehand, and we were like, we always kind of thought about all of those things as systems, right? The teams, all of those leadership team practices. So again, you know, we're getting familiar with this too. They're all part of your systems. But as I've thought more about it, I kind of like that they're calling out some specific systems that maybe we don't think about as much. So next slide. For our purposes, again, today and for time, we are not going to talk about the teams really, and we're also not going to talk about those kind of the things everyone knows tier 2 does, right? Tier 2 does screening. Tier 2 has options for interventions. We have decision rules, right? Like those are things we're all pretty familiar with. If you're looking for more resources or that does sound new to you, the Center for PBIS also has a tier 2 school level systems guide, slow down Mara, that goes into more detail about those and links you to some additional resources. Where we wanted to focus today for our short time with you all were again those systems that in my coaching experience, we really didn't, some of them we didn't do at all. and others we didn't necessarily do well, or we did them as check the box. And so with that idea of starting your tier 2 strong, these might be things you want to help the teams that you're supporting kind of focus on and think about. And with that, the next slide, oh, don't you forget about me. Like I was doing the slide and I just kept hearing that song. So I think maybe everyone's old enough to know that reference, but okay. So the new TFI first system item is around orientation and training. And so the main idea with this, because tier 2 is happening throughout the school and it is impacting so many students, it's really important that everyone in the school has some orientation and training to those interventions. And we need to think about that. We also need to be really thoughtful about how the families and the students are getting the level of training that they need to interact with the intervention. Next slide, please. Some questions that your teams can be thinking about around their orientation and training. Is there a written process for orienting and training key people? Are there scheduled trainings for the school team members? Do we actually have a way of training the people on the team to do the work? Again, do the students and the parents have access to the training they need? And do those trainings address all of the tier 2 interventions that are available? In the district that I was working in, most of the schools did some type of orientation training to tier 2 and primarily check in, check out, maybe 4 weeks into the school year, right? It was like at a staff meeting, here's check in, check out, here's what you need to know. And that was kind of the end of it, right? And we weren't really thinking about how are we coming back and doing boosters with our staff throughout the year on the interventions. How are we making sure that everyone, even the cafeteria staff, right? Like maybe they're not interacting with check in, check out all the time, but they might eventually. And how are we making sure everyone has that basic understanding? How are we making sure substitutes know what happens when they have a student that's on an intervention? And how are we onboarding people, particularly our classified staff, our instructional assistants, para educators, kind of whatever term you all use, if they're coming in the middle of the year, right? They don't necessarily get hired in that same cycle as our classroom teachers. So a really robust plan is going to think about and have mapped out how are we doing all of those things. And again, that Center for PBIS Systems Guide has some really good resources for that. Next slide. This is just highlighting again those resources. Again, the center guide talks about the training for your team, the training for all your staff, the training for all of your administrators, right? What do all administrators need to know versus the one administrator that's on your team? And then how are you doing systems coaching and instructional coaching? And I really like that they call those out as two separate things. As someone whose job title was an instructional coach, but I was actually doing systems coaching, right? I really appreciate that they're identifying those as two different needs. Okay, next one. Am I out of time? Okay, next one is level of use. And the main idea for that is that if you click Danielle, it'll pop it in there for me. The main idea for that is that if our tier 2 is not used enough, or if it's used too much, it's not going to be as effective and it's not going to be sustainable. And so we really want to be monitoring that to making sure that we're keeping our tier 2 supports at that level of use that we know is going to work. So next slide. So as your teams are getting started and they're figuring this out, you know, conversations around how they're going to monitor that. This is something, again, when I was doing this, I was like, wow, my teams, like, we weren't great at that, right? Like our tier 2 meetings, we were not great about really looking at how many students are in the intervention and how are those students responding to the intervention. And we were maybe okay with it with check in, check out because we had Swiss check in, check out, but we really didn't have systems in place to do that for our other interventions on a regular basis. Next slide. Resources for that. Again, the systems guide has lots of great stuff. And then just did want to call out for those of you that are using Swiss with your schools and the check in, check out level in particular, there are graphs in there that your teams can be using at least for check in, check out to monitor that level of use and whether or not it's working for kids. So that average daily points graph is a really nice one for how many kids do we have? How many kids are being successful, right? Yes, you have to count, but it's a pretty quick, easy one. The other one that I loved, but I feel like does not get enough attention in the world is the school-wide report. And I partially loved it because I used to teach special ed in middle school and kids would learn about box and whisker plots. And I was like, I've never actually seen this graph in real life. And so then I got into check-in, check-out splits, and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, it doesn't have the box, but still, you know what I mean? I was like, wow, this is actually a graph people use, and I find it useful. So if you're not familiar with this graph, basic idea is those top numbers are telling you how many kids are enrolled in the intervention. The line is telling you the range of scores the students had that day. And then the little kind of hash in the middle of that, right, is the mean or the average. And so this is a really nice way to quickly look and see how is check-in, check-out working. It's also really nice. I was working with a check-in, check-out implementer once and teaching her about this graph, and she was like really not happy with kind of her average scores. And we dug into some more data, and she decided she was going to go back and do something different for her whole intervention. And it was really cool because then we came back a month later and we pulled up this graph again, and she was able to see like actually the day she made that plan change for her whole intervention. And then she was able to immediately see it actually improved how the students were doing. And so it was really powerful and reinforcing for her that this thing she did actually made a difference. So again, those are available for check-in, check-out, and then thinking about how your teams are going to do that for their other interventions. Next slide. The next three sections in the systems and the last three are all talking about engagement. So they're talking about student engagement, family and community engagement, and staff engagement. Different though than how we've talked about student engagement in tier 2 in the past, right? Like we've talked about it as kind of that choice. So does the student get to pick what color, like Danielle said, their card is, or what the little, you know, our elementary school, sometimes the kids can pick what their little icons are, right? Or they can pick who's that person they're checking in with. That student kind of voice and agency in their own thing. This is really talking about for each of those groups, are they looking at data around your system as a whole and giving you input, right? So are they having time and opportunity to say like, how is tier 2 working overall? And so it's a different look at student and family and staff engagement than we've had in the past. So the big idea here, and I'm going to kind of talk student, but no, it says the same thing for family and community, is that our implementation is going to be more effective and culturally responsive if we have active engagement from all of those groups. And so planning for that before we get started, how are we getting input as we're building this up? And then how are we going to continue to go back to those groups and hear from them and learn from them? Next slide has some of the questions that you might be asking. What opportunities exist for your students to examine data and give feedback on tier 2? Is that student voice, those students that are doing that, are they, it's not every student in your school, but are the students that are doing that representative of your school community, and particularly those groups that maybe your data are showing are the most marginalized? And is this something that's happening consistently? So again, those questions are going to pop up for all three. I did put in a little video on student voice, but Danielle, let's go ahead and skip that. I was just kind of like, it's always nice when you're talking about student voice to actually hear from students and not from the three of us. So same thing, family and community engagement literally reads the same way. The main idea, Danielle, if you want to pop that in, is the same. And then on the next slide, the questions are the same. So Danielle, if you want to just go quickly through that. Faculty, same thing, main idea. But this is the one slide where I couldn't pull anything from the Center for PBIS as resources. So this is, like we said, new, right? Like this is different of how we're thinking about student and family engagement. And so there isn't as much out there yet, right? For how do we do this very specifically within PBIS? So we wanted to give you all some resources. Over to the right, we're gonna work backwards here. My husband gets really mad at me when I play cards because he says I like put my cards down in the wrong way. I don't know. Maybe I am really a right to left person. On the right side are some things that our colleague Megan Cave has created around student voice and community involvement in PBIS in general. They're not focused on tier 2 specifically, but I think lots of great ideas and things for you to think about from a tier 1 perspective that could be applied possibly to your tier 2. So just wanted to make those available to all of you. Also, in the schools that I've worked at with this middle orange one, the Speak Out, Listen Up resource, It's just different protocols for engaging students and looking at data and getting their feedback and input. So I like to share that because it gives a couple different ways to do that. And then the one I really wanted to focus on, because it's honestly the one that I'm most familiar with, is the data-driven dialogue. It can be really hard to bring together people to look at data, right? Like I'm making an assumption we all love our data and we're all good at reading graphs and talking about data and making sense of data. But that's not necessarily something everyone else is comfortable with. And the way that this engagement piece is created and the vision of it, right, is that people are really getting to come and engage with the data in an authentic way. And they are given an opportunity to process the data, to reflect on the data, to have equal voice in talking about the data, right? A lot of times, one or two people kind of run with things and everyone else just nods, or they're just still trying to understand what the graph says. And so this data-driven dialogue is something we used in our district for years. Kind of once we did it, we were like, this is amazing. And it really takes your teams through, before they even look at the data, they're making predictions, right? So they're just building their background knowledge, thinking about it. Then they get to look at the data. And it's literally just time for everyone to understand what the graph shows, right? What is the y-axis? What is the x-axis? What do you mean by this percent? Whatever it is, it's just time for people to understand what they're looking at, so that, again, everyone is coming to the table on an equal playing field. Then they make observations. But again, they're just saying what they see in the data. This is higher than that. This is decreasing. This is increasing. But they're not making any inferences, because again, with data, we tend to jump to wanting to understand it or excuse it or, you know, blame someone for whatever it is, right? Versus just actually see what it's saying. That last step then is that inferences part. And it's the time where people can really give you feedback, make suggestions. We did this at the high school that I coached last year. And we had a half day with a group of students and a group of staff, and they looked at their freshmen on track data, they looked at their graduation rates, they looked at their attendance data, and they looked at their behavior referral, you know, their Swiss data. And they went through this process on looking at all of those, and then kind of came together to brainstorm some ideas. And it was honestly like my favorite day of the entire school year, was really seeing students and staff authentically engage in data and process it together. So wanted you all to have those tools and know that they are out there. And then again, it seems like you guys are pretty familiar with the TFI. So maybe you're also familiar with the school climate survey and the feedback and input surveys, but our PBIS assessment portion of what we offer has all of these for free. We have some webinars coming up where you can learn about PBIS assessment in general. And then one in October where we're really going to focus on those surveys that, again, could be that data that you're starting to look at with folks. And with that, I'll turn it over to Danielle to wrap us up.
Okay, excellent job, Mara. Thank you so much. And great job sticking with us for those who are on the call. I know we went a little bit over, but that's how it goes. Tomorrow is our next PBIS Apps Community of Practice session. So if you're free tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time, it's not too late to join us. And Nad or Mara, would you drop a link in the chat really quick on that from our website? We do these monthly, and it's open to everybody. And it's less focused on us talking and more focused on bringing people together who are implementing PBIS from all over the country. No matter if someone is brand new and still figuring out what the letters stand for, or you've been doing this work for years and you know, you've got, it's always good to sort of, it reinvigorates people. That's, I think, some of the feedback we get the most, is that it's just nice to talk. And this month we're actually, or this year, we're focused on data. Tomorrow I have a guest coming, my friend and colleague, Dr. Sarah Falcon, who's going to talk more about the foundational elements of database decision-making and the TIPS model. So join us if you can. If not, there's one every month. Usually they're always on Fridays, because that's my favorite day. So I picked Fridays. And then finally, staying in touch, getting support. And so lots of ways you can reach out to us, support at PBIS Apps. That's our, we have a whole team at the university Most of them are in person, answering the phone, answering emails when you're using some of our applications and need a little help. So I think with that, that's the end of our show, and we'll leave it open for any questions or comments at this point.